Good morning, everybody. Welcome. And I've been given this envious and very tough task of sitting in between two pillars of Indian industry. And here, this poor young, big guy, but so my name is Nikunj Javeri, and I'm an ASCENT member. Been with ASCENT for the last, I think, I don't know, five years plus. Having a great journey, and I hope all of you as well are. I have a software company of my own. We have about 600 people, been in the business for the last 30 years, and have about over 600, and we have customers all over the world. My claim to fame, as I call it, was I was the CIO, was the outsourced CIO to PepsiCo for a period of 6 years. So I had the envious, the job of being a customer and a vendor to Pepsi. So I was giving my own company work, which is a great situation to be in if you can ever get into that. So, but that's where it was. Let me introduce briefly Anjali Bansal. Well, the title says, I mean, this says it all. The most powerful woman in Indian business. That's what Business Today, Fortune India have kind of called her. But well, that's a good award to get, and a good. But I think what she has behind her is really what counts. She's an independent director today at GSK, Bata, Tata Power, and Voltas. Is committed to a lot of social enterprise, so she's balancing both. She's an advisor at Seva and Grameen, and also on the advisory board of Columbia University's Global Center for Southeast Asia. And of course, focusing on corporate governance in a big way and diversity in a very big way. I think she, with the FICCI Center, and she's working with, co-founded the, women entrepreneurs on the board. There's so much, I don't know what to pick up from the whole thing. But along with that, she's also, been working with lots of startups. So she's a charter member of TIE. She's a managing committee of India Venture Capital Association. She's mentoring the Saha Fund, the Female Founders Fund, the Facebook She Leads Tech Fund. So, she's, I don't know where she finds the time, all over the place. But and of course, her past is stellar. Global partner MD at TPG Private Equity, strat consultant at McKinsey in New York and Mumbai. And then she ran and founded Spencer Stuart in India, and also was a global partner on the ASPAC board. So, again, you have somebody here who is somebody you got to pick on and pick her brains on. And what do I say about Harshbhai? I think we all know him. So I'm not going to say much more, except we have Harshbhai with us. Okay, and with that, I'll kind of get straight into the topic, if that's okay with everybody. I'm going to kind of. There was a bunch of questions which I had a chance to get from all of you. To be precise, I had something like 80 questions. We have a limited amount of time, so forgive me if I skip over some of your questions. We will be giving you all time at the end to ask questions and ask direct questions to everybody. I'm kind of going to go through a flow which I've created in my head, so please bear with me, okay? Thank you.
So one way to cut down is those who not come, you can drop their questions.
I don't know who they are, Harshbhai. I got a list.
That they will compile and tell you.
That's okay. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Anjali. What are the things that an entrepreneur should focus on when he or she is thinking of scaling up?
So first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I think I'm here to learn as much as to share, and having an opportunity to hear Harsh talk about scaling and building business, I'm telling you, is a rare privilege and treat. So I wasn't going to give up on that. And then in addition to be here with all of you, all entrepreneurs, I know I'm going to take more out of the session than I will give. So thank you for having me here. Delighted. And your question was?
Okay.
How should you think? What should you think about when you're scaling up?
When you start thinking about scaling up, what are the things you should be focusing on? What are the first few macro level things we should be worried about, etc.?
Sure. So in my mind, when you think about an enterprise, an enterprise is a house, it's a structure. And to build a big building, you need a deep foundation. So depending on what your ambition and scale of ambition is, I think that your foundation has to be as big, as deep, as broad, and more robust. And so there are some things that are foundational in any enterprise. And this is not about a startup or scaling up or Pepsi or Unilever or Marico. It's for all enterprises. Particularly when you are an entrepreneur, you are working in a resource-constrained environment. So it becomes even more important to have a very sharp view on the following things, in my view. One is strategy. And strategy is not sort of big McKinsey, BCG strategy. It is very practical, fundamental. What is my product? What is my service? Who's my customer? What's my product market fit? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to pay for it? So where's revenue going to come from? How will it be profitable? How do I sell? How do I go to market? So that, all of that is strategy. So I think it's very important to be clear on business model, business strategy in a very practical way. The second thing is, for scaling up, you need a lot of scalable systems and processes. Often in the startup world particularly, people think about process as a bad thing. Or, process, it's meant for the G's and so on. It's bureaucracy, it slows you down. It may slow you down temporarily, but you need to have processes that are robust for you to scale. And these are, again, very fundamental processes. So finance and accounts, so F&A, HR, and HR again is around culture and so on, yes, but again, extremely nuts and bolts, practical performance management systems, incentive systems, hiring, recruitment, and so on. IT, do you have a system that captures good data, good robust data, gives you the MIS, gives you the tools for good decision making? You may or may not have ERP implemented. But even without ERP, and Nikunj, who better than you to talk about IT systems, but even without that, you need to have the right technology and the right information systems, and marketing and branding. So if you're in anything that has to do with consumer, having a strong marketing muscle. So strategy is one pillar, scalable systems and processes second pillar, third pillar is people. That you have the right organization structure. You may not have all your boxes populated, but at least know what the functions are. Do you have the right people? Are you able to get the best people possible that you can either afford or attract at that scale? So people. And finally, financing. Very important to think about financing. And I say financing versus funding because at the scale-up phase, depending on the nature of your business, it may be equity, it may not be equity, it may just be working capital. So are you thinking about financing as a strategic pillar while scaling up? So I'll pause there.
Okay. I think, taking that forward is a great segue to the next step. A bunch of questions I've got on, before you even say, we have all this thought about, right? With multiple things which Anjali mentioned. Harshbhai, a question which, entrepreneurs like me we often ask is, I'm 55, should I scale up? So I think a question which a lot of, what I'm getting from a lot of people is, when is the right time to scale? Should I scale? What are the things you should keep in mind before you make that decision, it's time to go out and scale?
See, there are two sets of issues. One is your personal desire to grow. You have suggested a certain age, which to me doesn't make any sense. So it is nothing related to age. It is that burning desire to succeed, which will lead to scale up. So if you don't have the desire to succeed, and if you're 55, and if you say that, okay, I want to take life easy, then it's better not to scale up. But if you don't scale up, then you're falling behind. Mm-hmm. So then you have to start asking the question that, do you want to be in business? You have two options. One is to recruit a CEO or one of your family members if that person is ready to hand over the charge. Mm-hmm. Other is to sell the business or close it down, So I think that decision, and it's an important age you've written, whether it's 50, 55, 60, I think there is a certain change in one's thinking, and you've done that business development for a long period of time and you want to reinvent yourself. You want to do new things. So it's perfectly okay to raise those questions. Do I want to be in business? And that's very natural, I would say. A lot will depend on the individual. At 55, suppose if you start at 40, 45 and you still have a desire to grow, there is nothing wrong in in scaling up at 55. Why 55? People have started business. I think Captain Nair of Leela started business at 65 or 70, the Leela Hotel. So there is nothing wrong. And I don't think it's related to age, but it's related to personal mindset. What do I want to do at that particular stage in my life? And I've seen many recently, in recent past, many individuals who have given thriving practice, or somebody like Ashish Dhawan, he's left everything and into full-time into charities. But that's his mindset, and that's what he wanted to do. So I won't say that there is a right answer. I think a lot will depend on the individual. But it's better to go on thinking about it and say, what do I want to do in life, I think the second question you raised was, when should an organization scale up, So that's a completely different, it's related more to the business part of it. And I think a lot depends on to what extent, where have you arrived. So in your first phase of startup or post-startup, do you have the necessary building blocks in terms of the business? Are you seeing traction in terms of growth? Are you seeing newer opportunities? Do you see business opportunities in whatever you're doing or related to what you're doing? So I think if you're struggling in terms of existing business, either in terms of execution or processes, or things are not going as per your original plan, then you can't start thinking of scaling up, because if your fundamentals are weak and if your building blocks are very, very weak, then if you start scaling up, then it'll again hit you more because you are doing it at a larger scale. So I would say that the business has to come to a certain, I won't say break even or making profitability, but a certain stability in terms of ability to handle growth. And at that time, I think one should start scaling. But I think growth is very important. You can't say I will not grow. So I think in mind you have to say you have to grow. And for me to grow, I need to have necessary building blocks. Let me get over it and then start growing. If you have a mindset of not growing, then you're actually falling behind. And then it's actually you're losing your competitiveness in the marketplace compared to many other competitors, or you may just fall behind, and then it leads to demotivation within the organization. Because if the promoter is giving signals that he doesn't want to grow, I think the existing people who are in the organization, they will leave. Because most of your talent will need a certain challenge. And if they don't see that challenge coming, a challenge, a desirable future in terms of whatever, financial, otherwise, in terms of status, if they don't see that the entrepreneur is driven within, they will all leave. So the business will go downhill if the mindset is not to grow. So the mindset has always to be to grow, provided you have the necessary building block and you see opportunities in future to grow.
Okay, thank you. I think that's kind of explains pretty much. You don't have a choice. We have to all look at growth, scaling if we want to continue our organizations, right? But there is a question which somebody asked and said, the markets are uncertain today. There's a lot of uncertainty floating around in the marketplace. GST, demonetization. The world is going nuts.
Yes.
So with that in mind, from a timing point of view, is it worth investing today in scaling? Should we start thinking about, or should we say, let me keep my business running for a while, let the global ecosystem settle down, and then move forward? What do you think, Anjali?
So I was reflecting on that question actually, and I'm not sure there is one answer to it. I think it is so very dependent on what is the nature of business, what is your risk appetite. Because for each of these situations that presents a threat, if you will, or a problem, equally it is an opportunity. So the biggest returns tend to come in times of chaos and uncertainty. So there is, and so that goes to what's your fiber as an entrepreneur, and there's no judgment around it, by the way. There is nothing to say that it's better to be a risk taker versus not to be a risk taker. You have to apply, I think, some introspection. Who are you? Where is your business? Do you have the resources? Let's say you take a big risk, you take a big bet in a time of uncertainty. Do you have the resources to see you through? Because you're likely to have more volatility. Your business will go through ups and downs. If you're in an industry that has some regulatory risk, you could get severely disrupted, not by market forces, but by regulatory risk. So do you have the resources to see you through? let's say you're an export business and suddenly GST strikes, right? And GST is very good for the country, it's very good for the economy, but in the short term, it's going to extend your working capital cycle. 100 days. Do you have the resources to see you through that? So is that the time you should be growing, or saying, okay, let me consolidate, let me just focus, let me see through?
Oh,
Got it right.
got it time.
Well done.
Well done. Well done.
Catch. So you see, when there's a lot of movement,
This disruption.
are you watching? Right? So when there's a lot of movement, are you watching your core asset? That was a good save there.
Well said. Well said.
So I think there's no right answer. At the same time, when there is disruption and all sorts of things going on, whether it's in the world or it's in India and so on, you could be the sort of entrepreneur that says, gosh, I just raised equity, right? I have money in the bank, I'm going to take a few risks. But then make sure your stakeholders are in agreement with you that you're going to take a few risks. You might blow up some money, you might blow up some time, you might get a great return, but otherwise it might all get wiped out. So just making sure that you've kind of ring-fenced your core assets, your core business, you have the appetite, resources and internal, I would say, sort of strength to see you through if there is volatility. I don't know if there is a right or wrong time,
Okay.
per se.
No, and I think you brought up a great point about there may be, you may blow up people's money, and all your stakeholders need to be kind of consensus. And that's actually an interesting question, Harshbhai. I think you've dealt with this before, and so I'd love to get your perspective. Is there are different stakeholders in any business, and they have different aspirations.
Yeah.
You as the founder or the promoter wants to scale, but there are a bunch of other guys, investors, bunch of people who don't have that desire to do so. How do you kind of balance those multiple pulling forces and yet plow the path of scale? You've done this before, so I'd love to get your perspective.
So I think one is, you may have conflicts. First of all, you as the head of the business may have conflict with your own team.
Mm-hmm.
You may have conflict with your board of directors. You may have conflict with if you have a PE person, then PE person. If you are a public company, then you may have conflict with some of the analysts and your investors. So you're right that such conflicts will occur.
Mm-hmm.
And your key task is then to see whether whatever you're suggesting, is it good for the business? And you need to have dialogue. You cannot say, I will do it and forget about them. I think it's very important that you have a dialogue with each stakeholder, especially if it is a large kind of investment or a big bet you are taking which will impact them. And I think you need to, ideally speaking, if you get a consensus, that's the best option. If the dialogue itself will help you improve your proposition, they will expose you to the risks you may have some blind spots. So I think it's very important to have a dialogue with all the stakeholders. First, initially internally, I would say, with the team. And once that's crystallized, then ideally speaking with the board of directors in that order, and then with the external investors. Sometimes, in spite of doing all that, some other stakeholder may say no, I don't agree, and at that time you need to take a call whether you want to go ahead still and take that risk, because ultimately I think it is your call, and sometimes trying to get consensus, you don't want to have too much of a compromise decision making. So if you have the courage of your conviction, then sometimes you may say that, okay, I am taking this call in spite of what I've heard from you, and just tell them these could be the implications, negative implications, but there could be opportunities also. So I think the ultimate call could be the head of the business, and you cannot get into too much of compromises. I'm not saying that you don't dialogue. You must dialogue. You must try and arrive at a consensus. You must fill in all the blind spots. But still, at the end of it, if you think that if you are on the right track, because you have that inner, you may call it gut feel, or you may have conviction, or you feel that it's very important to do that. Especially if your team is backing you, I would take that. If the team is not backing you, then I would start getting worried, because I cannot be a lone person where my team is not backing me, the board is not backing me, and the external investor. But if I have the backing of my team, I would try and take, even if some external investor is saying no, I will try and convince them first. If that is not the case, I will try and take a decision. If it anything to do with governance, I would not touch it. Anything to do with governance in terms of breaking some rules, then it is out of question. But if it is purely a business decision, then depending on what is the issue, I may decide to go ahead in spite of that opposition. If I am a team backing, I don't know what Andeep is, but it is.
I feel quite actually similarly, which is your key resource really is yourself first as an entrepreneur. And the reason you're an entrepreneur and your investors have backed you and your team works with you is because they trust you and your judgment. So somewhere, we all, I think many of us, I know I am, for example, very data driven, very analytical, but the worst decisions I have made ever are when I ignored my instincts. So I think that there's a role that instincts and judgment play, and that's what makes you an entrepreneur. So you have to trust that. And I completely concur. If your team is with you, then the work has to be done to get your stakeholders aligned. And by the stakeholders are not there as blockers. When they are also trusting you and backing you and so on. And sometimes they bring up questions and issues that you might not have thought about. So this very constructive, positive, spirited dialogue is a very useful thing to do. I think anything that takes governance risk is highly avoidable. I think I know for sure I wouldn't have the courage to do that, and I don't want to have the courage to do that. So if you take governance as hygiene is required, then it's a matter of have you done your homework, have you got your stakeholders aligned, and particularly is your team with you. You don't want to be the leader who's way out in the front, waving the flag, tilting at the windmill, and you turn around and there's nobody.
I have a slight twist to this question, though. A lot of us, not in the room, I presume, are second generation entrepreneurs. And that's where some of the conflict sometimes tends to come in. There is the founder or the father figure, and there is a second generation entrepreneur who's come in, the son. And now the son wants to take risks, but somebody wants to say, hold on a minute, I don't want to do this. That's, I think, more, and I can speak for myself. I have my nephew running the business, when I know the kind of conflict I go through with him. So.
I want your nephew.
But the point being, how do we address something like this? Because I'm sure that's something which is in everybody's mind. Is how do I tell my dad or my uncle, no, I'm going to do this even though you don't like this. What are the thoughts? How would you handle that?
Yeah, it's natural that such conflicts will occur, and it's actually quite healthy. Especially when the next generation comes in, they have a different mindset. Logically, I think they would have studied more than their parents or their uncles. So it is bound to occur. So there's nothing wrong, first of all, if you are a young person, to say that my thinking is different from my elders. I think the key thing is how do we move forward, and that's where a lot will depend on, again, the dialogue you have with elders. And ideally speaking, if you can able to convince them fully, then that's the best option. But if you're not able to convince them fully, I would say there are two options. One is to, if you have a new business idea or if you want to do something differently, you need to tell them, okay, let me prototype that in a small market. See what is the result. And if be aligned that, okay, if I invest an X amount in terms of, say, recruiting of 10 people in the state, it is going to lead to a certain result, and if that is achieved, then allow me to go from one state to a region, and from one region to a national in terms of expansion. So I think it's very important that you pace it out with the elders and de-risk by prototyping it. It's a good thing to prototype because you'll also go through a learning curve. So from all angles, prototype is good, but only thing it leads to a certain delay. So if the opportunity is going to run away because of lack of time, then you may just want to question whether is it worth prototyping. But by and large, I've seen that prototyping is a very good option as long as the opportunity is not going to run away. And arrive at an action standard with your elders and say that, okay, this is the risk, I'm reducing the risk by 1/10. And let's arrive at an action standard, and if that is achieved, then I will allow me to grow. Because then you have to break that resistance. You can't have two positions, two people taking positions, because if you're not allowed to expand, you will feel demotivated. If you go in a big expansion mode and if it doesn't work out, then your job is at risk, So there is always that way out of prototyping and breaking that bottleneck, and that's not necessarily with the elder and the younger generation. It happens internally also, between a boss and a subordinate, And I think I've seen the best way is to allow me to experiment and prototype at a much smaller scale. Because again, we go on discussing, we go on doing so much research, and I always tell my team, about market research has limitations, huge limitations. Don't let market research decide for yourself. You may want to test your hypothesis, but you can't market research decide what you will do. And the best way to do is to actually be in the marketplace. There is no way any consumer research is going to say that this product is going to succeed beyond a point. You have to put that product in the market and test out the hypothesis, and it's quite complex because you have the consumer, the product reaction, pricing, in our case FMCG, packaging. So there are so many things so many variables which the consumer looks at, and then it's very difficult to capture all that in market research. And the best way is to, rather than delaying the whole thing, is to do a rapid prototype and be in the market and use that prototyping as a way to learn. I think the most important is it's not go no go. Prototyping is an opportunity to make you learn, and if need be, you go on making variations in your prototype model. For example, in a state you want to grow by, I want to employ 10 people, and that's not working out because it's too expensive. Then you may say, okay, let me cut it down to 5 and see whether it's work. So you go on, it's an active experimentation lab, and that's the mindset you need to have. And if it is active experimentation lab, the whole objective is to read the action standards and achieve a good financial viability of that prototype project. And if you can do it to prototype for 1 or 2 years also until you get the actual results.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I think we've kind of heard from the experts that growth, strategy, essential in moving forward. I've got a bunch of specific strategy questions which people have asked. I'm going to just try and go through as many as I can in a short time so to address some of your questions. So it may not be in any specific order, so please bear with me. Okay?
I'm wondering whether after answering, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just leaving it to you. After answering, there may be some other you want to
Follow.
some clarification, something or otherwise. I leave it to you, whichever is the format you want to do it.
So what we do is we kind of take the questions which have been coming
and
in
let them
advance.
write down. And then if I've said something on say prototyping and somebody wants a clarification or
Yes,
somebody has to
we'll do that after
End.
the first
Okay,
break
fair
that we
enough.
do.
Yeah, so we've got a.
We'll take a
all right.
I'm kind of going through the.
No.
Okay, so Anjali, this is to you. What is the primary strategy an SME needs to think about when they're looking at moving from an SME to a large industry kind of background? Okay, and is it sales team? Is it having right promotional activities, or is it production capacity? Now, they've given 3, but if there's anything else which you'd like to specifically ask about, that would be great.
Very good. I would say actually all of the above, depending on what your business is. Obviously, you will have a stronger bias for one versus the other.
Mhm.
If it's a consumer business, then there's marketing, there's sales, pricing, placement, packaging, and so on, as Harsh mentioned. If it's an enterprise type business, B2B business, then you think about it slightly differently. Then your consumer brand, consumer marketing is less important. What's more important is enterprise sales, relationship management, key account management, and other types of skills. But I think at the heart of all of it is what's your core organizational capacity. And the core organizational capacity is yourself, your core team, senior team, and other people and systems. So that's really core organizational capacity. Everything else builds from there. So in the process of scaling, when you go from a mid-sized enterprise to a large size, and regardless of what numbers we put around them and say this is SME and this is large, I think that is at the center. For there to be a strong, let's say, a marketing strategy, you need to have terrific marketing muscle. So you need to have a great marketing leader, you need to have an understanding of branding. Again, if you don't have it in-house, should you recruit? Do you need to bring them in-house? Do you recruit? Or do you find sometimes, because if you're not able to get the best person, you're at a scale that you're not able to attract the right talent, is then find or create for yourself a network of advisors, which is again not an ideal long-term solution, but it can be a short-term fix. So you may get 50% of a really terrific marketing resources capacity, which is better than zero, and it may actually be better than 100% of a very mediocre resource either. So there are different ways to building it, but again at the core of it is all the things I said earlier. Be very clear about what your business is. Are you a consumer business? Are you a B2B business? Is it something that is a long sales cycle, in which case you have to think about it differently versus a short burst to market? If your business is something where you can utilize and digital marketing much more flexibly, smartly, and so on, then that's a skill set you need to have. So where you spike, I think for all enterprises there is a basic bar on capability. So beyond that bar, what you spike in, what your expertise is as a business, should be linked to really what your long-term vision, long-term plan is for the business.
Okay. There's a burning desire to grow, and sometimes what happens is you're really growing really well and fast, and that's when you say, great, I'm on fire, time to scale. What are the watch outs? If you're really growing really fast and you're thinking of taking some risks, what would you keep in mind before you took those risks? Because it's people like to say, hey, I can go wrong. So some watch outs for everybody, please. Anjali.
Just a question.
So I'm going to use a metaphor. There's a saying that don't get too far out ahead of your skis. When you're skiing downhill, you're gaining momentum. The key thing is they keep telling you don't lean too forward, because if you lean too forward, you will get into a roll which you can't get out of. So there is a very nuanced balance. There is a position which allows you to go on speed but not getting too far ahead of your skis. Now, that's where I'm going to turn over to the expert and say, what is that position?
What's like one other thing which on risk management, people think risk management you should not think, you have to be risk free. It's like driving a car without brakes, You need brakes. So it's very important for you to evaluate what are the risks. And ideally speaking, when you are on a growth agenda, you have to identify where you can go wrong, I think it's very important, whether it is your cash flows or whether it is your sales not happening. So I think it's very important, because everything will not occur as per your plan, Things will change. So it's very dynamic, the business, and it will definitely be different than what you have thought so, especially in a new business. So it's very important that you are fully clued in terms of how your original plan versus what you are doing is different, and what are the key reasons, and where do you need to shift. And I think that ideally speaking, when you're in a growth cycle, you just need to ideate first what can go wrong with the team, and then be watchful of those areas, and every few months or maybe at a certain time frame, you need to evaluate what was the original plan versus where you are today, and what are the implications of that shift in whatever you achieved. Do you need to protect yourself in terms of more cash flows or whatever else, So I think it's very dynamic, those situations, and you have to go on reviewing it, if need be, every 15 days with you and your team, because you don't want to fall flat. You may just be doing well, but all of a sudden you realize that you don't have any money.
Right.
So you have to go on, you have to have a very strong grip on your business in terms of where it is going. And the CEO has to have that grip. To me, a good CEO should have very good grip in numbers and should have a very good pulse of the organization in terms of where it is headed. I think that's a key aspect of one good CEO, is to have a very good pulse in terms of not only the financial numbers, but how are the people feeling, how are the customers doing, what is the growth opportunity. Because if the CEO has set that pulse, then his ability to predict future, take risks, contain risks, I think that will play very important. And it need not be just CEO, but the CEO and his team. So I would say concurrent critique and also tracking the progress, and wherever there are deviations, what can you do about it?
And you come to you mentioned the word CEO multiple times. Now, in our a lot of us entrepreneurs are probably founders and CEOs,
Yes.
both together, and sometimes founders don't think they can go wrong, or which is sometimes the problem. The question I think which I want to bring up is, the couple of questions from a founder point of view is, when should a founder say I'm done and walk away? Because keep in mind what's happening with Uber and stuff like that. You're seeing that at large organizations like that. But even for smaller organizations, what's the right, not a time from an age point of view, but from a milestone perspective? Is it time to bring in a professional board into your CEO into the company? And second is, okay, how do you let the CEO get wings to actually be successful? Because that's another thing which I think is a challenge for a lot of first generation entrepreneurs especially. So Anjali, perspective, Harsh, I thought.
So I wanted to add one point around how do you create sort of that braking system around you, because in early or mid-stage enterprises, the founder is the CEO. So whereas you might have that, the founder by nature is a risk taker, is someone who is optimistic and so on and so forth. And not to say that you should not be optimistic, but if it's not in you, so self-awareness is very important. If it is not in you to think about all the things that can go wrong, please recognize that it is not in my nature to acknowledge the things that can go wrong and think rationally about them. If it's not in your nature to do that, some people are able to do both, but if it's not in your nature to do that, find people around you who can do that for you and with you. It could be your colleague, it could be your COO or Chief Operating Officer, whatever it could be a CFO, but someone who you respect, who's a peer in the business, in your team, or someone outside. I've seen situations, I've personally had situations where, my mentor, I make sure that at least a couple of people around me who are going to ask me tough questions. And in that moment, you might not like to hear it. But if you respect them and you've empowered them to ask you tough questions, it will at least act as that braking mechanism for you. So I think it's very important to have that around you. But as you scale up, and then if you have the ability to get some, I think CFOs play a wonderful role in organizations where they're able to ask these tough questions and say, I'm sorry, it's my job, I'm going to ask you these difficult questions. That's a very nice thing to have on your team, to have colleagues and a culture that is open to dissent and debate, very respectful, open to dissent and debate. When do you bring in an external CEO and how do you give space? And I think we are looking at the master here, so I'm not even going to try and address that.
I'd love you to also to give a perspective, because you've dealt with Harsh Bhai, always viewed as, oh my God, he's got this massive organization in front of him, he's done this.
No, we all believe
many
he's got
years ago,
this.
Harsh Bhai, when you did this the first time. Let's go back to those days.
No, I think I'll just to continue her story. I agree that I think, as I put it first, what is good for the organization comes first. So I think from an organizational point of view, if you are the founder, are you doing justice to the organization in terms of, are you the best CEO or can there be somebody better than you? Just because you founded doesn't mean that you should continue. I think the organization's interests come first, because if you are not doing a good job as a CEO, then it's better to either get a replacement from outside or internally. Ideally speaking, internally, if the company is doing well, and give the reins to that person. I think the second thing which goes into this is, what is at that particular stage, what is my personal aspiration? What do I want to do in life? So sometimes you may be a very good CEO, but now I have lost that fire. I have lost that. I want to do something else. I want to reinvent and try to do something else. So that could be another trigger where you step down and you bring in another CEO. Now, I mean, specifically asking about my own personal example, I stepped down as CEO about 3 years back, and I never thought at that time that I would step down. But I think ultimately it so happened that I had kept a certain age. And everybody decides, at what age you step down. It occurred prior to what I had thought so. But I, again, wore the cap of what is good for the organization comes first. Because if there is an individual who is an internal person who's good and who aspires to be in your shoes, and if you don't give that opportunity, there is a threat of losing that person. Then you need to take a call whether I want to lose that person or I want to stick on to my earlier time frame of whatever, two years later, And then I discussed that with the board, and we arrived at that it's better that I step down. So because it is good for the organization, and any step down, and those who are, I mean, it's something which is easier said than done, you know, because you are full time involved into business, and all of a sudden your involvement would be, in my case, is about 25% in the company. So what do you do? That's my first. So you have to, as I said, reinvent yourself, and you. But at that particular point of time, there is always that uncertainty, that fear. You know, will I have enough things to do?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to start showing newer initiatives, whether it's new business or a new social venture or helping others or board of directors or whatever else which is going to keep you occupied. Because you have to be mentally occupied, that's for clear, you know. You cannot just enjoy life, okay. You may increase a little bit of holidays, you may, once in a blue moon you may play golf on a weekday, but beyond that you have to be occupied fully, you know. So it's very important that, and luckily it's, I mean, I never imagined what all the things I would do post stepping down, but the number of initiatives I'm doing like 8-9 different things, and completely different, you know. And my typical day is very different from the next day, you know. So today my whole day virtually is for ASCENT, you know. But I will have business review, I'll have a review with my son, family office, ASCENT, Innovation Foundation. There are 2-3 other things, new business I'm pursuing. So there are lots of things which is I'm finding it very interesting to handle a variety of issues. And it's good for the organization also because it has sent a very strong signal down the line in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Normally, very few, or there have been some examples where the promoter CEO has stepped down and got in a professional person. So it has sent a very strong positive signal in the corporate governance area as well as to all our investors. So, with always a fear, okay, after you know, what is succession plan, thing like that.
Harsh, if I may,
Yeah.
just ask a clarificatory question.
So I think because that's what we decided, that
We'll have more questions later on, please.
And we will do it, and that's the process we want to follow.
Thank you. Yeah. Otherwise, it'll become. Yeah.
But
Thank
note
you.
it down and raise it in
Yes,
next.
of course.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I would also like to underscore one thing that Harsh mentioned here, which is the clarity in your mind on what is good for the organization and your business may not always be aligned with what is good for you, and vice versa. So there comes a time in the life cycle of an enterprise where what's right for the founder should become smaller than what is right for the enterprise.
Correct.
So ultimately, the institution has to be larger than the individual. And again, without ascribing any judgment around it, but it's what you are aspiring to build. If you're aspiring to build a business that supports you, then you're at the center of it. But if you're aspiring to build an institution that outlives you and leaves a legacy and so on, then very soon the institution should become larger than yourself. And your employees, your customers, your stakeholders, shareholders, all of that should come before you.
Just to add, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, we had a very nice framework when I started working at McKinsey. It was client, team, firm, then me. What comes first is your client. It's a privately held partnership firm, right? So there are no listed shareholders. Otherwise, it would have been shareholders. So client, then your team, then the firm, and then yourself. So I've always found that a very useful hierarchy to keep at the heart of what you're doing.
Interesting.
So just to add a few things which are related to this question and related to what is happening in India, and I think two sets of issues I just want to highlight, though it's not a part of the question, but I think it's interesting because when you step down, normally the founder, and we've seen it in two big cases where the corporates have been very high on governance, very highly respected, but they've landed themselves into this controversy, how to handle succession. I think the key thing is to be aligned first. If you are stepping down, then what do you expect out of the CEO? And what is going to be your role? What is going to be your CEO's role? And when I say aligned, it has to be put down in writing. So my board of directors told me to put it down in writing and go back to them. So I wrote down what will be my new role, and the MD, the current MD who took over from me, he wrote down what will be his role, and then we compared notes. And we had a very high degree of overall concurrence in terms of what should be the role, and wherever there was some, we clarified that. And it goes down to great detail, like which investors will I meet, what will be my role in image building or PR stories, how will I get involved into day-to-day business. So I have like monthly review with me and his team. I have skip level meetings. I have PR will be mainly Marico related will be his. I will be more PR on macro issues and things like that. So there is very high clarity in terms of what I am going to do and what he's going to do. And we go on reviewing that also once in a few months. Is it working well? And I think that dialogue and that written down role of me and his has really helped. And many a times I've seen in case of whether it's Tata or Infosys, that was lacking. There was no alignment. It was left. The other is, what does the founder expect in terms of what needs to be continued? And again, the Infosys is a clear example. And the founders had certain expectation in terms of values, culture, and it didn't happen. But that had to be aligned. So I wrote down, the MD as well as the board, the values of the organization, the purpose of the organization, the strategy of the organization. And all these three were discussed with the MD as well as the board. And we were completely aligned. Not to say that the strategy will not change, but for the timing, this is the strategy. If there is a change, again we'll have a dialogue at the board level and come back. But there is no ambiguity in terms of a certain values. Everybody is aligned, and then we also have arrived at the base of which we will measure our culture once in 2 years. So I think this whole exercise of what the founder expects the organization to do, even if he is not there, and what is his role when he steps down, has to be handled very carefully, and it cannot just be you handle it and then it leads to, because there is normal tendency, to I would interfere maybe or to go a little bit more, but here it's very, very clear. And all these two examples are clear. There are a lot of learnings out of this, and luckily we did it well, so we have not had any problem.
Fantastic. Okay. I think that's a great learning. Shifting gears a little bit, moving to professional services businesses, and you mentioned Infosys as one, but I think the question which people want to know is, it's very tough to scale up professional services businesses because there's a lot of people involved. So you worked with McKinsey before, and you've worked with multiple. Anjali, how do you go about scaling a professional services business?
Great question. So, I actually had the opportunity to start and scale a professional services business here. And so when we started Spencer Stewart in India, nobody knew the firm. It was a very big firm overseas, and the US is the #1 firm and so on and so forth, but nobody knew it in India. And we came into the market 10 years after 3 other large firms had already been here. And initially I would get questions like, "Oh, Spencer's, you've joined retail? I didn't know you were a retail person." I'm like, no, this is not Spencer's from Chennai in retail, Spencer Stewart, professional services, etc., etc. So lots of learnings along the way, but I think, there's, if you think about factors of production, the single factor of production in a professional services firm, we can talk about intellectual capital and all of that. All of that is true. It's there, you have knowledge, you have intellectual capital, but the single factor of production in a professional services firm is people. And you don't get people in because you have terrific intellectual capital. You get people in because they think they are going to grow, they are going to learn, and the professional services animal, the DNA of a professional services person, is very driven by learning and knowledge and impact and contribution. It is somewhat different from other industries. So those kind of people like to be around other similar kind of people. They want to be continuously challenged. They want to feel they're continuously growing. They want to feel continuously recognized and rewarded and loved. So it's a very high touch management of professional services people. And the only way you grow your business is by getting great people and letting them grow. And so if there are folks here who are building what we call PSFs, professional services firms, please know that your biggest role is to sublimate yourself. You have to come last. Everybody else has to come ahead of you. And one thing I found quite useful is to keep reminding people, and this, by the way, this is also a very type A competitive type of DNA, to keep reminding people that together you will win, together you will win. And it is better to have a smaller slice of a larger pie than to have a large slice of a very small pie. And the only way you grow that pie is to get more people on board.
Okay.
And then nurture them, let them grow, let them flourish. As a leader, you take more and more of a back seat, but you are there. You are the safety net, you are the backstop. You are there to lead from the front and do all the difficult things, but get used to getting all the bad phone calls, unhappy clients, things that are not working well. Let the glory, let the credit go to others, and that's how you build up PSL.
Yeah, but just taking it one step forward, people obviously very, very important, but I think a big factor in everybody's mind is sales. How do you actually go about bringing in marquee customers when you are, as you're building a firm?
Right. So you are sort of chief salesman. You're the chief janitor. You're the chief salesman. So janitor, what I mean is, it's a very important task. That's why I start with that. All the cleanup you have to do. Because nobody else wants to do the cleanup. You are the chief salesman because you have to go get the business. At the same time, you can't always be the chief salesman.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, you have to become head of business development, so you're doing more strategic sales versus everyday sales and so on, and then eventually become head of content, and if you think about boxes and the labels on those boxes. But yes, I think a somewhat underrated sales tool is fabulous client delivery.
Sorry, say that again.
It's fabulous client delivery. If you deliver value, you will get business. So rather than focusing at a certain point in time, you have to do initial sales and so on, but at a certain point in time, as a leader, your focus has to shift a little bit into saying, are we hitting the ball out of the park every single time for our clients? And if you do that, then you will have repeat business. And when you have repeat business, you need to do less sales. You're doing less pitching. So I think the best sales tool is very, very good client work.
Mm-hmm. And just
I think the same thing, by the way, goes for anything that has a customer. It could be an enterprise technology business.
Right.
It could even be a consumer business. Right? If you're delighting your consumers all the time with a great product, they'll keep coming back to you.
And one final question on professional services. Does it make sense to scale by doing inorganic acquisitions and use that as a way to create scale, or would you recommend more the traditional organic route of doing that?
So I've seen both work.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent a lot of my career in firms that don't believe in inorganic growth.
Mm-hmm.
So they haven't acquired other professional services firms and so on, because the view was that when you have a strong culture, and remember again, PSFs have very strong cultures, that's what makes them successful.
Mm-hmm.
Accenture has a very different culture from a TCS. So if you try and merge the two, can you imagine? So there is one point of view in the professional services world that you cannot actually create a sustainable, effective merger of firms like that. And so I've spent time in firms that haven't grown inorganically, haven't acquired, and because we don't believe it can be integrated and be made to be effective. On the other hand, we've actually seen a lot of consolidation, whether it is the Big Four space, or is the tech services space, or even the strategy consulting space. So we've seen a lot of consolidation, and clearly there are some firms that have chosen to grow inorganically, and they have been able to make it work. I mean, I was talking with somebody at PwC, which acquired Booz, and sort of chalk and cheese businesses. So Booz has now become strategy and within PwC, and I asked them how many partners have stayed and so on. So they gave me the numbers. As expected, a large number of the partners had left. However, they were able to move up their average fee significantly.
Oh, wow.
So their purpose was met. So I think you have to.
It's worked out well.
It's worked out well for them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
So there's no yes or no. It's can you integrate?
Can you integrate? Integration too.
Yeah.
Okay, Harshbhai, a separate question very often.
Sorry, one final point on
Sorry.
this. Actually, in the technology world, there's been a lot of inorganic growth in tech services because
Right.
you may have a product capability or a new technology capability that the only way you can get it is acqui-hire.
Okay.
So this whole notion of acquiring a company to get the talent is very prevalent in the technology world now.
A little shift from professional services, but very often when an entrepreneur wants to scale or start and work in a new geography, say US or UK or something, one of the approaches they tend to take is build a partnership. Get a partner in place. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What is your take on creating partnerships for entering a new geography from a?
See, let me precede that by talking about what one should do when you enter a new geography, because it's very important that you study where you're going.
Okay.
And when I say study, it means if you're in a consumer product, then look at the consumer habits. Look at, if you have to advertise the media scenario, you have to look at how stable is that economy, what is the exchange rate, how vulnerable it is. So it's very, very important to get a very good grip of macros and competitive scenario before you decide to enter a new geography. And it's very, very different compared to your home market. So you have to be aware of what you're stepping into, because you may get hit, and the chances of your getting hit are more in those markets because you're not as strongly based as in your home market. For example, we entered Egypt and nobody had thought of the Egyptian revolution, or again the Egyptian currency is down by 50% in 1 year. So these are risks of entering newer markets, and I think my experience shows that it is more risky to enter newer markets because of the fact that you go through a learning curve and you're not able to predict what is going to happen because you are staying a little far away. So that's one. Having decided to enter, whether you should do it on your own or whether you should do it through a partnership, something will depend on what is the role the partner has to play, and is it very well defined. It need not be a joint venture, it could be an alliance. I've seen joint ventures, most joint ventures, at least in India, have not succeeded. And I personally have a mindset against joint ventures, but that doesn't mean that you should not look at joint ventures, because a lot of time goes into aligning the joint venture partner's thoughts with your thoughts, in terms of the business, the execution. And it takes a lot of energy in terms of managing a joint venture. There have been joint ventures which have succeeded, so I'm not saying no, but I think you have to go through the pace of that. Fundamentally, I think what is your value add and what is that joint venture partner's value add, you have to be very, very clear. In some cases, because of government regulations, you are not able to establish in new countries, so you are forced to go to a joint venture partner. So that's completely different, because if it is imperative for you to be present in country for whatever reason, and that country doesn't allow you to be on your own, then you go to a joint venture because that's what is expected. But again, you choose a joint venture in that case which is best suited to you. So the choice of joint venture also is, after having clarity in terms of why you want a joint venture, is very, very important. And then you need to have the right chemistry with that partner. And if there is uneven sizes, I've seen, if your size is 100 million, a joint venture size is 1 billion, then you will, at your end, you will be dealing at your level, but you will be dealing with 3 levels, somebody 3 levels down. And it's very difficult to do that, because then that person will have to get alignment to the top. So when you have uneven sizes, it becomes far more complicated.
Okay. So, next. Just again, switching courses, but retail. There are some obviously retailers in the room, and the question they have is, it's really retail takes a lot of money to scale. What would be your take on that, Anjali? You know, what would you recommend to retailers today in India from a scaling perspective? What should the approaches they should be taking?
So there's a big overall point of view on India macro retail, so I won't go there.
Okay.
There's sort of enough and more out there on what's the format. It is still unclear in India whether it is a big box, small box, Kirana, what is going to win, what is clear is a big box is not winning. I'm not even going there, and I'm not sure if anyone wants to know specifically about that. I think retail is a tough business. I don't have as much exposure to it myself, but it's a old business, so there's a lot of science around it, and there's enormous amount of knowledge available on how to do retail. Like real estate, what my retailer friends tell me is all about location of your store. So it's the location, picking the right location, managing store operations extremely tightly. So good retailers have such an amazing knack and appetite for the detail of every day what sells where. So a view on merchandising and so on. So why in India is your Kirana store the most successful retailer? Because he has just an incredibly nuanced and detailed understanding of his customer. So his micro market, his merchandising strategy, what he stocks in that little shop, he stocks everything his customers need. And if he finds a requirement from a customer that he doesn't have, he takes it, he puts it somewhere in the database in his head, he runs the analytics there and makes sure it is there next month. So, but now retail, of course, is much more scientific. There's enormous amounts of sort of data-based approaches and analytical approaches to running retail. But ultimately, it comes around to what format are you in? What is the kind of market you're serving? So, what's your business development or store rollout strategy? And then very tight management of store operations. And many retailing companies, you have different people. There are some people who are very, very good at store operations, and this is what they've done for 40 years. And there are others who are much more business development oriented and are thinking digital and are thinking, how do I do omni-channel and so on and so forth. So very different skill sets.
And you bring up a great point about omni-channel. With the big elephant in the room with Amazon, Flipkart are all around. What would your recommendation be, Harsh, for retailers, that how seriously should they look at as a platform, and in India specifically?
So I think depending on retail, again, is a very broad term. And e-commerce, depending on what you're doing, the percentage of e-commerce may vary substantially. In an FMCG business, e-commerce contribution is 1% of total sales as of today.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you ignore that, it's growing. But in some other businesses, it can be 20-25% also. So I think a lot will depend on to what extent e-commerce is a disruptor to your business in retail, and what is it likely to be, and how do you overcome that threat. So some existing retailers have tried to go into e-commerce themselves, but I don't think many of them have succeeded. So in that case, how can you improve your own business model to ensure that you are not losing business to the e-commerce person? Is a big challenge. You have to see. Beyond the point, I don't have an answer. I'm not in that business, but I think a lot will depend on to what extent are you vulnerable to e-commerce threat, and how can you overcome that through innovations, through improved services, or wherever something which they are not able to offer.
Anjali, you have a take on this?
So I think the emerging view is that the consumer will increasingly want both. So they will want that physical offline experience, the touch, the feel, the trial, and they will want the ability to browse and comparison shop and shop for the best price online. So we are starting to see from a bit of a convergence coming about, where all traditional retailers are exploring digital and own e-commerce. The own e-commerce is unclear what its success will be. As Harsh mentioned, I think it's not really succeeded for almost every major retailer.
Right.
with a few exceptions, with a couple of exceptions. But for the most part, they are very much stuck in that old model. And also, by the way, their technology systems don't enable and support this very rapid prototyping that is required in digital e-commerce. On the other hand, when you go to the online players, they know digital, they know data, they know how to do digital customer acquisition, they don't know how to run retail. And they are actually very different skill sets. They're also different businesses with very different unit economics. So when you are running an online business and you're used to seeing very rapid prototyping, very rapid scale up, and you can change your prices dynamically, for example, you cannot do that in offline retail.
Yes.
So I think we are starting to see a convergence where the consumer today has been exposed to both and wants the best of both. Hence omni-channel, which is easier said than done, but we're starting to see some places.
Yes, that's why Amazon bought Whole Foods, in a way.
Amazon bought Whole Foods for, I think they bought Whole Foods for $12 billion.
Yes.
Their stock price went up by 15.
Yeah.
So it more than paid for itself.
Okay.
But grocery is a whole different segment,
Yes.
actually. It's a whole different category.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Okay. There's a question from somebody on the financial services side. You know, we all know of Uday Kotak. He's a guy who went from individual to institution. Any other such names you can think of? Because I think there's somebody who wants to be inspired by somebody other than Uday Kotak, who is obviously very, very well known in India, who is in the financial services, who has moved, become an institution from an individual founder. I couldn't think of anybody else, but is there anybody? Harsh?
Not as diverse in terms of whatever he has done, starting with bank to NBFC to investment banking to insurance to stressed assets acquisition.
yes.
I don't think anybody has done as
Not
you know,
quite
I think
that
not
gamut.
quite that
the
gamut.
3-4 Gujaratis who were doing well earlier in the market, like Hemendra Kothari, Nimesh, and Uday.
Yeah, you're right.
And
yes.
these three, Uday, I mean, other two, one sold, other two not done as well. But Uday is one who's actually.
Yeah, but Hemendra Kothari could be examples of
Yes,
others.
I can't think
I guess
of
more
as
recently
diversified.
Rashesh.
Rashesh also, Rashesh
That,
Ansari.
there are Rashesh, even Ashok
Motilal
Wadhwa,
also.
But they're
But they've not
in
done
the-
to the extent,
yeah.
they don't
Not
have
to the
bank,
extent,
yeah,
not to the
it's-
breadth. And
even terms of market cap and
institutions.
also is nowhere near what
you
Uday.
think of value creation for shareholders, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's he's probably
HD
HDFC Parekh, yes. for sure.
HDFC.
Yes.
HDFC.
You can look at that, yeah.
Yeah.
Now you can think about, if you think about
Yes.
sort of professionals
Yes,
in that
yes,
sense, then
yes.
HT Parekh.
Right.
Definitely, yes.
And then Deepak after that, he
Yes,
was grown it
yeah.
to some
Yes.
extent. Mr. Vagul at
Vagul,
ICICI,
ICICI,
KV
yeah.
Kamat.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Good. There's a question for you, Anjali, specifically, which says, if you've taken money, very often the company's innovation cycle and the fund's life do not necessarily coexist and aren't the same thing. And experimentation very often hurts profitability. So what is, with that in mind, how do you balance that? And what's the ideal time to scale up in an environment where you have different forces pulling on you?
I don't think anybody's got the answer, least of all me. Somebody figures it out, please write a book, and then you will never need to work again. But yes, it's a difficult one. I think we are still in probably sort of the second cycle of VC in India.
No, you can,
Like I said, I think in there is some rapid prototyping happening in this space also, by the way. The issue is, of course, that the stakes are very high. There's large amount of capital involved. And for better or for worse, everything plays out in the media. So, ordinarily you would have some space as an entrepreneur and as the set of investors around the table. So if you think about it as the enterprise, forget the entrepreneur and the investors for a minute. What is at the heart of it? At the heart of it is still the enterprise. There are a lot of customers, a lot of employees, there's a lot of capital invested. So you would think that the health of the enterprise should come first. But the practical reality is the entrepreneur wants to do something. You may have 4 or 5 funds around the table, all of whom are in different times. Somebody may have come in 5 years earlier and so now they need to exit. Somebody came in a year earlier, they don't need to exit. Somebody's fund life is coming to an end. I think there's a lot of complexity when you think around the interests that sit around the table versus the interest of the enterprise itself. From the enterprise point of view, you should obviously continuously innovate and continuously grow and continuously strive for profitability. But the practical reality is you also have to be cognizant of your stakeholders. So sooner or later, as founders, when you start raising money, and that is again a very important reason to build a robust team, because you will spend time in fundraising and investor management, investor relations, as you should. You've taken other people's money, you're responsible for it. So, the opium should not become addictive. It should not lull you into a stupor. You should think about opium as other people's money, which has to be given back with healthy returns. So it has to be managed.
Fair point.
And again, that very open, transparent dialogue is super important. Just have integrity around everything. And it's easier said than done.
Okay. I've talked about scaling up. I think the question which some of them have is, when is, while I'm in the process of scaling, when do I kind of pull the brakes in? What is it, you mentioned some of the factors that you need to ring fence yourself. But, when do you say if scaling results are not happening, we should say stop? And sometimes also there is a business which is running for a while. The product is now becoming non-viable, but it yet delivers, meets expenses, it does everything. How do you phase that out? And bringing in new products, which takes time. So it's kind of a question which is more about, what do I do if I can't scale? I'm not successful in scaling, or my business is right now in a problem. I'm not making money, but 65% of my revenue is thanks to a product which is dying gradually. What kind of approach do we take? And Harshbhai, I'm sure you've had these kind of challenges with multiple products you've launched before.
So I think first of all, you don't have to be emotional about it, because many times you have started something, you're so emotionally involved that you forget the rational part, and you're dogged about it that, okay, I want to continue, or you are scared that what will others think if I discontinue, So that scare of what others think and the emotional attachment should not be driving the decisions. The other way to look at is, one question is, suppose if I had to start that business today, would I have started, So if the answer is no, then automatically you don't have a right to be in that business. A lot will depend on to what extent have you made investments in a capital plant or in people, and if you discontinue that, what are going to be the implications of that? So you need to evaluate that. So I don't have a answer, but I'm just saying that keep the emotions out, keep the fear of what others will say out. Ask question, if I had to restart the business, if I had to start the same business today, would I have started? And then understand, if you have to close down, what are the implications of closing down? You don't want to close down and then say, I'm saddled with so much losses because I have so much fixed cost which I cannot reduce, or so much of interest or capital investment. So sometimes you continue just to keep that ship going, because you have a certain fixed cost or capital investment which is supporting this business.
Okay, I think that's great. Not being emotional is probably essential. I'm just going to ask the room for, how much time do we have left?
Another 10 minutes before we take a break.
Okay, so I don't have much
We'll
time.
open the Q&As after the break.
Okay, no, because there's a bunch of yet questions. I'm going to, I want to ask the room what they would like me to focus on, because there is talent is one big area which a lot of people have asked questions on. There's some startup stuff which I'm going to keep aside, because I believe we've already done a huddle on startups, so you can maybe ask that in Q&A if you guys want. And then there is stuff on fundraising in general, funding and the types of funding, etc.
That also we've had a session.
Yeah. So
The talent also we had a session.
Talent.
So what should we focus on? Yes, sir. This is your huddle, not mine. So please tell me what you would like me to talk about. Talent is okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm going to start on talent. If you have some more time, you can ask it in the Q&A, please. Okay? Thank you. Appreciate it. How does one attract top-level talent when you're a small business? And that's something which everybody talks about. And then now, with, unfortunately, the whole approach was ESOPs and stuff like that which were being given. But then with the housing and the Snap deal and all the not so elegant situations which have arisen, ESOPs aren't as attractive as they were maybe before. when people were being, granting them to attract top level talent. So, what would be your take, Harsh? I know you have done this before multiple times, so I'm going to ask you this question.
See, a lot will depend on your current size and to what extent you have an image in the job market,
Mhm.
If you are too small and if you don't have any image, then it's a real issue.
Okay.
So you need to arrive at a strong employee value proposition to attract talent. Ideally speaking, that value proposition should be something which others are not able to offer. Or wherever you are targeting to attract talent, you need to have some differentiator. In our case, at the time when we started Marico, it was a new company, so we had to, there was no image in the job market, so we had to create an image, and we arrived at our employee value proposition, which was saying that, okay, we are going to empower you, because in FMCG industry, when you are competing companies which were MNCs, there was less empowerment because a lot of decisions were taken by somebody sitting abroad. So we thought that is a good differentiator to attract talent, and we leveraged on that, and we discussed that with internally and amongst the headhunters, and we said that this is something unique which we are offering, that empowerment, the culture of the organization, the career options, the growth, and we want you to say this story when you want to attract talent. I think that helped us a lot. So I think the clear thing is doing all that work. But if you're too small, then you are really at there is a war for talent, and I think most CEOs are underestimating that role they have to play to attract talent. They have to play a very active role in terms of the image of the organization, what it stands for. A lot of people who want to join you, they will ask the people, ex-employees who left you. So it's very important to maintain very good relations, because all your ex-employees are like your ambassadors in the marketplace. And if I want to join you, and if I get a very negative view about your organization from one of your ex-employees, I will never join you. So I think it's very important to look at all the stakeholders. But if you're too small, and I'm going back to my days in Bombay oil industries where you sit in Masjid Bandar and family managed, there was no way I could attract talent. So then I substituted that with working with individual consultants, because at least you got that skill gap, and they were able to fill that skill gap. Because as an entrepreneur, you have to find answers, so you need to have good minds. So virtually I had a consultant for HR, finance, marketing, and then I would have somebody else who would be open to working with that consultant, some bright youngster. But that that consultant would provide us the mind, the overall direction, and ultimately you would execute that. But that you're forced to do it because you are just too small in a highly competitive market to attract good talent. So I've seen that at that stage it worked out well, but today we don't need that kind of intervention from outside, because we are able to get our own good people. I don't know, Anjali will be able to add more value to this.
I think that's actually a very creative approach to getting access to the right quality of skill set if you're not able to get a full-time person on board. I think I see a lot of companies that are going through the scaling up process struggle with balancing a little bit. Should I get somebody who's experienced or somebody who's really smart? And the challenge there is that if you go for raw intrinsics and say intrinsically really, really strong person, at a certain size and scale, you may not be able to attract somebody who's both very intrinsically strong and very seasoned. That's where the trade-off is. It's actually a very good option to create a combination. Get a smart, hungry youngster who's rational and has got good sense and a well-managed ego that they can work with a senior consultant. So you can, today, even more than ever, today there are a lot of people who have come out of corporate careers and are keen to work more flexibly with companies that are scaling up and work with entrepreneurs. They find that very exciting and are willing to give, whatever it is, 30% of the time, 50% of the time, And you can make it as a part of their KRA that they are not just advising or providing consulting services for a particular function, whether it is HR or finance or marketing, but part of their KRA is actually mentoring and growing this person that you have in house. You could choose to go the other way and say, I don't really need cutting edge creative thinking in finance. I just want a very, very solid CFO who has done this for 20 years and done it multiple times. Then you go the other way and you say, I'm going to get somebody who's very seasoned, very solid. And so for different functions, I think you can arrive at different solutions.
No, I'll just add a little bit of what I think you're absolutely right in saying that you have to select somebody who is the best fit for you. What do you require? And I've seen that many times. You may want to evaluate 2 or 3 persons. One other thing which I realized was that in evaluating and finalizing the person whom that consultant is going to work with, who's within your organization, he has to be aligned, he has to buy into that story. Because if he doesn't buy in, then no amount of the consultant, whatever is saying, will work out. So in that decision making, you have to involve your head of finance, for example, if you are taking a finance consultant. And he should say that, yes, I am going to benefit from this working together with him. And he has to completely, and then start off in a very small project. I've seen many times. It's also important for consultant to know whether is he working for the right client, because so start off on a very small prototype project, and if that is working out well, then scale it up rather than going all out.
I just add one thing which has worked for me well is sometimes when like CFO, you bring in a retired corporate guy, and they are happy to spend time, not really charge you the earth, moon, and the stars, and leverage that, and that's something which has worked well for people like us.
And you can do the same thing for marketing, for example.
Yeah.
A lot of people who, if you think very practically, retirement age in most companies is 60, 62, 65. Today, we're all in good health, living longer. People have lots of energy at that point. They're not really ready to hang up their boots.
I think
Better to go to individual consultant rather than a firm.
Yeah, for sure.
firm will send you a junior guy anyway.
No, for sure. Completely. I mean, when I say consultant, I'm talking not of the professional services firm. I'm talking about individuals.
Yes. But I think taking this forward, what people are finding is as we are scaling, very often we notice that our teams are not cutting it. They were good for what they were when the business was smaller. Now they are not able to cope with that thing, and hence a transition has to happen, right? How do we manage that and yet keep your current business running, not disrupt everything? Because that's something which is now becoming a challenge as scaling is going on. So again, either of you please, leave it to you.
I've dealt with this.
So then you are the master.
You've dealt in multiple cycles even.
If you look at my own teams, I mean, they've changed 2, 3, 4 times. All teams, It is a real issue. Somebody who was very relevant at some stage, for whatever reason, because the business has become more complex or much bigger, or whatever reason, that person starts losing effectiveness. I'll again go back to what I said earlier. The organization's interests come first. Because if that person is not able to perform, and it is interlinked, in an organization. If there is a one weak player, then it demotivates the other, his peers, because that person is not performing. So it's very important that at some stage you take a call. You may have performed brilliantly in the past. And I'm not saying when you take a call, you just ask him to go straight away. You put him in a role, ideally speaking, which is a different role where he may be able to do well. If that is not possible, give feedback to that person, provide training inputs. Try those approaches, but all that ultimately many times may not just work. Then you have to ensure that you disengage. But you do it in a human manner. You don't do just all of a sudden, say that you go tomorrow. You have to give 3 months, 6 months time. And I think the true test of that disengagement is that after that disengagement happened, you should be friends with him. You should not have that feeling that he was. So you should do it in a very good manner, which
It's basically he perceives you as a friend,
Mhm.
and you maintain good relations. So how you do this engagement also is very, very important. But you have to do it.
There's no choice.
There is no choice.
Choice.
And if you don't do it, then you'll fall behind. So don't feel guilty about doing it.
Hmm.
And don't delay it.
Yes,
So most of
absolutely.
us are very conflict
Yes.
avoiding. When you have a deep sense of friendship and loyalty with your early team that has worked with you. And my learning as I was building the business is again, so the first people decisions are when you delay it because it's not happy for anybody.
Absolutely right.
Actually, it's not even good for the individual. They know they are not performing. They are not feeling happy. They know they're not as respected as they used to be. And so actually, it's not the question of what. The what is very clear. You have to do it. It's how you do it that is important. So it's not the what, it's the how you do it. And how you do it is incredibly respectfully, very gracefully, self-sublimating, giving them, and again, depending on, if you're separating for a ethical governance reason, I think that's a no-brainer.
Very absolutely. You
That
got
is
to do it
not
overnight.
tomorrow, that is
That's-
yesterday.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and it has to be very crisp, very surgical, finished, and a clear message of non-tolerance. But if it is really just because, the organization, the enterprise has outgrown the individual, please do them a favor and let them go and flourish somewhere else. But help them and do it nicely.
Okay. We'll take one last question for Harshbhai and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Sorry, but we'll have to ask you already have balanced questions to the panel afterwards. Harshbhai, I think there's a requirement, if somebody wants to know that they try to recruit good people from, talented people from larger organizations.
Yes.
When they come in,
Yes.
it takes them a long time for them to settle into the new culture and actually start delivering.
Yeah.
And that's when there is a big mismatch between what the employer or the founder thinks and the guy, and it just becomes chaos.
Yes.
I remember in one of our huddles only been met, I think, I'm not sure who it was, he said that all these guys coming in from outside are useless.
Yes, yes.
The senior guys are coming in. And he actually said, raise everybody from within. Now, what would be your take?
See, I think you have to see what kind of organization the person is coming from, what is his background. If he has stayed in a large multinational, for example, or a very large organization for a long period of time, then you'll really have that issue because that person is used to a certain way of working, certain systems, certain hygiene factors, and you'll find it very difficult to assimilate, to work with other people who have not had that background. So I think while selecting is very important, not to just get swayed by a big name like levers, because that lever person who's, suppose if he or she is in levers for many years, not able to settle down here, and that's not necessarily at our level also, we may have that problem. So we have to take a call to what extent that individual is the right fit for you, rather than getting swayed by his experience or the company which comes from. And ideally speaking, if that person has worked for different types of organizations, Indian companies, multinationals, I think that's in that person's favor, a smaller organization, entrepreneurial outfit, because that person has gone through that experience curve and knows exactly what he's stepping into, So I think making the right choices is the most important thing. I don't know what Anji feels.
I completely agree, which is, it's not the what they have done, but what context they have done it in. So they may have, for example, grown a brand from X to 3X, but was it in a context of a strong structure and strong systems and a very high level of talent and capability around them? Then they may be very effective in that context. They may not be as effective, and again, there's no black or white, no right or wrong, but they may be less effective in a context which is not as structured, doesn't have all the systems and processes in place, doesn't have that high degree of talent around them. And so I like to think about it in a few different ways. The ideal profile are folks who have spent their early years in what we call academy companies. So they have learned marketing, at a Lever's, or they've learned marketing at a Pepsi or a P&G or whatever it is. But then they have moved and gone and done a few other things. They have demonstrated that they can take professional risk in their life. They may have failed a couple of times, because from every failure there's learning. They may have worked in different kinds of organizations, different cultures, so they have shown cultural adaptability. Because remember, they'll have to make a big adaptation when they come into your organization. They've shown flexibility in their approach, their ability to work with different types of people, their ability to create templates versus follow templates. And a lot of flexibility. And I think when you meet people, when you start interviewing them, then you get a sense of what is behind the CV. So the best questions to ask is not what you did. Start with what did you do? Tell me how you did it. And that how you did it tells you a lot about the person and their potential fit with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm sorry you couldn't ask everybody's questions, but please feel free to ask them at the after the break. So
Since
thanks.
we had a delayed start, we should keep the break for 10 minutes only, and then we'll open out the forum for Q&A with them directly. Okay?
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor for questions, and I am going to look at. So please raise a hand, and then I'll choose whoever I feel like. Since you raised your hand first, sir,
Yeah,
please.
Thanks. Hello. Morning, all of you. It was really great learning and listening to all of you. My name is Suhas. I've just recently joined ASCENT. I run a professional service firm called Prompt Personnel Consultancy. We are into human resource management, total HR solutions. We are present in 8 cities: Mumbai, Pune, Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Kolkata. Labor law advisory, compliance management, audit have been our core competency. Then HR services, and then came the talent management, the recruitment. The temporary staffing space that we have entered just 5-6 years back has overtaken the other services. And temporary staffing is actually a commoditized business to a great extent, and the other services, that the billing and the service fee that we receive are totally different. Now we've scaled up heavily. We've got 12,000 plus temporary staff on our payroll with 70 plus clients across locations, 430 plus locations that we serve. We are in a dilemma. We don't know whether to focus on other services and look for higher revenue, or focus on the temporary staffing business, where we look at the team leads and the Quest Corp, who have grown exponentially in the last 10 years and raised huge funds on the stock exchange. That's the question. We are in a dilemma.
Should be able to answer the question.
Yeah.
Not into so much into.
Or we continue the same model and we let all the services complement each other and look at everything as a best model and a one-stop shop for HR. Identity
Right.
crisis, maybe.
No, sure. I think you may have started with one and then you have gone into the second one, which seems to be growing faster, if
Yeah.
I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, we are beating the industry trend. Like, it is like 3 times the GDP, the growth, but we are actually more than
I
that.
see.
We are actually.
And from a profitability point of view,
It's good enough. We don't need funds.
so if you were to break up your business pie today, from a revenue point of view, how much is HR services, how much is staffing, and from a profit contribution, which is higher, and by how much?
Temporary staffing is actually overgrown, so it is now 90+%
Of revenue.
revenue, and 10% is the
Rest of
other
it.
services, because that's 100%.
Right.
Here only 7 to 8%. That's the difference.
And from a margin contribution point of view?
Here the service related, other services gets better revenue, but temporary staffing gives us steady revenue.
So it's,
But it's
large volume, large steady volume,
It's volume, it's
Volume.
volume.
lower margin,
Yeah.
and this is high, which is not surprising at all.
Yeah.
The other question is, what do you want to do? What is the kind of business you want to own, run, be associated with, etc.? And what is the overall purpose? If you're thinking that there's a lot more scale that you can get from temporary staffing, by all means go ahead. and it seems to be getting good traction.
Yes, it is.
How do you do customer acquisition is the other question. So if you are getting customer acquisition, the staffing business is able to do it standalone, then it is a full-fledged business. Versus saying that your customer acquisition actually happens from HR services, and then you transition it off. No.
Now we have different sales teams and different verticals. They drive their revenues and businesses separately. But there are clients which avail services from all the verticals or some of the verticals.
So any downside to running both and focusing a lot on staffing and
There's
just
a
letting it
dilemma.
go?
I mean, we don't know whether to focus here or here, because we are seeing that the real core competency and other services actually are getting hampered because of the complexity of temp staffing business.
So it doesn't need to be either or,
Okay.
actually. It doesn't need to be either or. If you have the bandwidth, you and your team have the bandwidth to manage both, and if you're seeing some value that you are creating as a business from HR services, you could continue that. But it looks like, and I don't know what the competitive intensity is of temporary staffing. See, these are all low barriers to entry business. But once you get
Temporary staffing, yes, you're right.
Very low
But
barrier to entry.
Other services, it isn't.
yeah.
So we have that advantage.
But also, once you get scale in temporary staffing, as you've mentioned, whether it's team leads or press corp and so on, you can grow exponentially. So if you think you have the muscle or you have the desire to do that, then by all means build it up.
Okay.
But then build it up not as an afterthought, that oh, it's happened, now it's growing.
Okay.
But really focus on it, create the right strategy, what's your go-to market, how you're going to sell, are you creating the right information systems to support exponential growth.
So last question. So other services should only complement the main service.
I'm not seeing too much synergy there actually. And I'm sorry, it's a very, very surface level conversation.
Yeah.
I think you need to go much deeper.
Much deeper.
Yeah, you have to go much
Because
deeper.
it's
It's a very
your
surface
takes are too big,
conversation.
and within 2 minutes to answer is actually it's a suicidal thing for anybody.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't.
And
I mean,
don't
your question
formulate a
is heavily
strategy on a
loaded.
conversation like
It's a half-day
this.
conversation. It's a half-day conversation, and not amenable to
Yeah,
group
we
discussion.
cannot formulate
Yeah.
strategy on a quick.
That's
We shouldn't actually.
All right.
Anybody else? Sorry. The lady at the back. Sorry, I give the lady's preference.
We have a 7-year-old company, and into semi-precious jewelry. I want to know, we're looking to hiring a consultant. So, how do you know a particular person is the right person for your business as a consultant? You're talking to a lot of people, some people not able to zero.
I think first of all you need to be clear why you
What
need a
you want,
consultant.
yeah.
Okay. So you have to be absolutely clear what that consultant. Otherwise, yeah, I want a consultant without any. So you have to put it down in writing. What is that consultant? How is that consultant going to help? You need to internally align, as I said earlier, with your team. That okay, if I decide to get a consultant like this, he'll be beneficial to us. So it's not just your thinking, but it has to go down to the level with whom the consultant will work with, you know. And then you need to start our search in terms of what are the options available. You have to do it through your own networks, because I don't think there are directories of consultants and things like that. And then after having an initial meeting, you need to check out the references, you know, and see what is the best fit. And after that, you need to prototype with that consultant in terms of a project, small project, and then take some risk. If that prototype doesn't work, go to somebody else, you know.
All right, that's the right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think there was, yeah, please.
So you both discussed about the importance of strategy. So is there a certain formula or a certain structure we need to follow while building a strategy for our business?
There's so many books on how to do strategy.
In short, or the crux.
Yeah.
Would
you like to take that?
I think you've done something on how to prepare a business plan and all that. Ultimately, that's arising out of a strategy
Business
once
plan.
you finalize the
Yeah,
strategy.
yeah.
But it's again a very loaded topic, you know. You're asking a question which cannot be answered within 2 minutes, you know. I think there are enough books to read on strategy. If you can read the books, then because
Which one
otherwise,
do you recommend?
I don't know often I can.
Porter strategy is a good place to start.
Yeah.
And you know, there's all of those strategy and all of those frameworks. Pick one and work with it. And the framework is not meant to be, the framework should not be for framework's sake. Frameworks are meant to be helpful to structure your thinking. Ultimately, it's going to end up being what's your product, what's your service, who's the customer, what's the pricing, how are you going to sell, where will you get revenue, where will you get profit.
Gentleman at the back, yeah.
We are running a financial services company that's into financial planning and comprehensive wealth management. There are a couple of questions that I have for both of you. One is, when we're trying to recruit, new staff, typically, the ones with quality, I mean, with a lot of good background in their resume, etc., they prefer normally to go with the bigger brands rather than with a smaller brand like us. So how does one go about, getting the best of the talent, be it on the freshers or on the experience side? So that's one. Secondly, on the lines of what appeared in the news a few days ago, like, there are certain key employees that left the big investment banking firms like KPMG or let's say Deloitte or whatever, and they're going and joining competition and they're taking away the clients. So there is this clause that the ex-employer is now putting in, saying that you can't engage with the client after the employee has left. So how does one kind of safeguard that? We have, as of now, we have this non-disclosure, non-compete clause already in our appointment letter that our employees sign, but how does one ensure that, this conflict doesn't happen? I know it's grey, but these are the two thoughts that came to my mind.
Sure.
So I'll take the second one, the non-disclosure, non-compete, non-solicit. So confidentiality, non-compete, non-solicit are pretty standard clauses. They're very hard to enforce unless you have both the appetite and the resources to go into litigation. So they're at best deterrents, and they sometimes prevent the future employer from engaging the employee who's leaving you. And typically in situations where you actually even have the need to invoke such a clause, it's a bad departure. So it's either, and I say bad departure, it's a technical term, it's a bad departure, where it's a bad leader who's going with malintention to actually compete with your business. So there's no straight answer there. It's a tough situation if you find that an employee has walked out with a book and knowledge and is using that competitively. You can use it as a deterrent unless you want to actually litigate.
I think that's the main thing. Litigation is the biggest issue. If you're willing to take that risk to litigate,
And
and we actually did that once.
You don't know whether you succeed or
Yeah,
not.
you know.
And
No,
when
but
you're
it's more to
building
drive
your
a
business,
message.
you don't want to spend time doing that.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend your time, bandwidth, money, resources doing litigation against an ex-employee. So you have to find a different solution to
I
that.
thought I had answered your first
Yeah,
question
first
in
question.
terms of employee value proposition. What is the unique thing you have to offer?
Yeah.
You have to have something unique. You have to identify what do you have against big multinational which is going to attract that employee. And you have to go a little dig deep properly and arrive at a proposition which is truly unique and not just for the sake of saying it. Just like I mentioned about the empowerment in, say, a big MNC and offering challenging careers. So you need to identify and search for a unique employee value proposition which you can leverage. And if you have one, then you may be able to offer something which may help that person attract. The other is to use your existing people, ex-employees to leverage, as I said. Because many times a good HR head can also play a very important role in convincing. You need to have a very good HR head. I've seen that he should be very well respected, he should be articulate, he should be speaking on your behalf in terms of attracting talent,
Thank you.
Yes, at the back. Yeah, please.
I'm Tina from ASCENT Jewelry. As my partner just mentioned about this consultancy thing, just wanted to first thank Harshbhai for such a lovely platform we get. But if in this platform, in ASCENT, if we can get somebody from our industry, like if I say a retail industry, and if somebody can just talk about it for an hour or something, and just tell us their challenges and how they've come up and what steps they've taken. Maybe sometimes, that one thing can just trigger us and we can also move forward that way. So if we can get this consultancy thing, 1 hour at least from the retail expert or somebody, you know.
You mean a
and-
session like this, or huddle
Yeah.
session or consultancy? There are two
A
separate
session,
things.
a session. So of course for
I think depending on what number of people may be there in retail, you may just want to look at all your ASCENT members, and wherever there are, we've had some sessions on family managed companies,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
So, but now you're talking of a certain
Retail specific.
certain
Domain
category or
expertise,
some
yeah.
specific
Domain
sector.
expertise, yeah.
I mean, if there are sufficient number of people, we can get it. Getting
Yes,
people is not an issue,
Yeah.
but we need to just ensure that there are enough number of interested. We can try out retail, you can try out IT, you can try out so many.
Thank you. Thank you.
The conclave will cover retail.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Akhilesh. I run a manufacturing company into packaging. What I wanted to understand is that when your senior team is looking to who are not invested in your company in terms of money, but in terms of more than 10 years of experience, and who are been asking you that how could what is in for long term, like how can we get a share or pie of the profits the company is making. And the background I come from is that I've invested in all the money. I'm giving what I should be giving. Now I'm open and I would like to do something, but I don't know how to go about it. So just wanted to probably get some insights on this from whoever can.
So you're talking like an ESOP kind of approach, is what you're saying?
I don't know, I'm-
Something like that. Some kind of approach that
I'm
way.
just,
I think wealth creation.
Yeah, wealth
Wealth
creation.
creation.
Wealth creation.
You're more an expert. I can speak also. Because I'm
Please
better
do.
than- No, you're better, huh?
No, there are many ways, you guys. So I think what we were talking about here is what is really that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily looking for a share in the company, right? It's not like ownership that they're looking
No,
for. They're really
they're
looking for
looking
some
for-
wealth creation.
Yes.
Right.
They believe you're getting all the wealth creation or the value that is getting created in the company. So if it's really just sharing in that, there are many ways you can do it. The ESOP is talked about, but ESOP also comes with more complexity. Also, it means that they're shareholders for a long time. So, do you necessarily want other shareholders in the business? That's a question. If you want more shareholders in the business, by all means. And then they're really riding the upside and downside, everything together. Shareholders get both. On the other hand, if their mindset is more of an employee and you want to keep it that way, then you have profit sharing mechanisms, which then you can share. You can have a very transparent system of sharing profit with some of your senior most employees. You can do phantom stock, or again a mechanism which kind of mirrors the value of the enterprise versus just the value of the profit. There are many ways to cut it. If you want other shareholders participating with you, then ESOP is an option.
But who would be I'm sure there are some service providers, somebody who helps you in arriving at the options and.
Oh, actually,
Many, ne?
a lot of the CA firms will do
Yeah.
it with you. So,
Phantom stock and that also.
so
So is this
structuring
CA
that
firm
will-
or
law
ESOP
firms,
firms? Yeah.
law firms, the CA firms,
Law firms.
the comp firms do it, but they're all so HR firms, but they have to be a comp and ben expert to do
Yeah.
it, and they
So
they're
law firm
inevitable.
or a CA firm?
Not law. I don't think law is it.
You have tax lawyers.
Tax.
They can help you structure it in that sense.
But before the
But
decision,
for
that is a part of
for the
structuring.
structure, the concept.
Correct, yeah,
and,
which is-
what the kind
Then
of-
you
What are the
need a
options
comp
available?
firm. Then you need a
Common
You need a
benefits.
comp firm first to arrive at what is the option.
Common
It's not
benefits.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not difficult.
It's not at all
It's
difficult.
actually either of these avenues is okay. So
You have to
Which
go into
one?
each option and then evaluate what works best for you.
and a similarly open dialogue with your colleagues who are asking
Yeah,
for
yeah.
this as to what is it that they're looking
Correct.
for.
No, it's the wealth creation part.
Yeah.
No, but it's very, very real because they've seen somebody else who's working in a public company getting huge amount of money, and
Yes.
so it's natural. Don't get upset by the fact that this is the
I'm
expectation.
open, but I don't know what to do next. So
No,
I'm just like,
no, it's not very difficult to tackle.
thank you.
Yeah, I'll take you next. I'll take you next, please.
Hi, I'm Furkan Ali. We are into a fashion business retail format. We have a brand in footwear space, specific into women fashion. And the question is, sometimes there is a big challenge which comes in front of us as a growing brand. What would be and how should we determine the velocity of scale in terms of at times external factor like there would be a lot of pressure to raise money since it is a cost intensive business, we need to keep funding the business. So whether you can bridge it with a debt or rather raise the capital. So while you raise the capital, the question comes, the velocity of scale has to be at a certain level, otherwise the interest of an investor doesn't come to that level. But at the same time, other external factors like, you need to see the unit metrics of the whole business and see the whole sense of the business in terms of it is right to scale it at this time or not. So what is it? What is the right balance of this scale? If we are growing too fast, if we are growing too slow, where do we, always determine this factor? Because this is challenging. It always comes in front of you as a challenge. So, like in just in a very
A very loaded question.
Very
You
loaded,
can't,
it's a big question.
Just to go into details is very difficult to
we'll
answer
have
the question. Yeah.
We need to know a lot more.
Yeah,
about the
then
business
you
to
cannot
give
do
you
it
a
in 2
specific
5 minutes.
answer.
You need to see what is the margin, what is the implications of going, what are the risks, what kind of money. So it's something which cannot be addressed in 2 or 5 minutes. I'm saying no because it's suicidal for us to also give an advice without knowing exactly what is the issue.
It's also, are you a
Just in a
manufacturer,
general
are you a
term, like
brand, are you a supplier? I mean, there's so many ways you can do footwear.
Right.
And it's a very competitive, very unorganized sector with very few brands. So
Right.
it's a big space.
Right.
We're in a great industry. But we'd have many, many more questions before we can give you any sort of
Okay,
an answer.
great. Okay.
So maybe some other
We'll
time.
connect later, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lady at the back.
Hi.
Huh.
My name is Dipti and I'm in the culture and communication space. I was curious to know your journey, Anjali's Consol's journey, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes around that. And my question is, how do you handle A-level personalities when they burn out, right? Especially when...
So
Interesting.
to the second one, I will say I don't know because I haven't had to do it. And I hope
But in your team, in your organization, have you not experienced...
people getting fatigued, yes.
Okay, but not burnout.
No, if you're saying burnout, when there's a explosion, collapse.
How big is it?
Fortunately, I haven't. Maybe fortunately, but one knows of people, of course, who get to a point where they have just
Enough is
burnt
enough.
the candle at too
Just to
many
clear
ends.
the question here, as entrepreneurs, sometimes
Yeah.
we experience burnout.
Of course,
I
you do.
mean, I don't know, maybe I'm using a very heavy word here, but there is exhaustion. There is sometimes,
Yeah.
am I really doing this? For what cause? Those kind of questions hit me. I'm sure Harshbhai must have experienced that time and again.
I think it's a coping mechanism, how you are managing your life and how are you
I don't. I think.
what is your leadership style, how much are you delegating, how much are you empowering, how are you managing stress,
Yeah.
how do you meet that stress, and there are different answers for meeting, for me it's physical exercise, for you it may be music, for somebody else it may be
Something
reading,
else, yeah.
somebody else may be walking, so it's a combination of managing a business in terms of achieving the right work-life balance, but in spite of that you'll have stress. And how do you manage that stress? You need to identify within what appeals to you to manage stress, but it's manageable. I personally think it's manageable. At least in the kind of business, I've had very little sleepless nights in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only sleepless nights I've had are when I've had to deal with difficult people issues. And if I had to ask someone to leave, and I hope I never stop having sleepless nights around that. So as a leader, I would want to give, I would want a difficult decision around letting someone go. I would want that to give me stress. But that's me. So otherwise, sleepless night, if I don't necessarily think so, but I think in work-life balance is a very good point. For most entrepreneurs, work is enjoyable.
Yes.
So you don't need balance.
Correct.
Actually, so you work, you live.
Your work is life.
That's the balance.
I meant it for professionals. So for entrepreneurs,
But they should also enjoy work. No? There's nothing wrong.
So you mean for your team?
Personality A type,
For
how
your
to
team,
manage
is it?
them and extract the best out of them, and suddenly they feel overworked, they feel stressed, and
So that's part of leadership and management. You'll have folks who go through those phases where they're saying, "Oh my God, this is too much. I can't handle it." And then it's part of being a leader is also being a bit of an air traffic controller, both for yourself and for your team, because there are all these planes. They have to land. You can't let anyone go, so you just do it one at a time, and you help your colleagues see it the same way and and sometimes you have to do a bit of triage. When you have a team where you know your system capacity is X, but the work that is coming because of very happy circumstances of growth, so it's a high quality problem to have. When you have more work than you or your team can handle, that's a good problem to have, versus the other way, when you don't have enough work. Right? So if that's the case, then you have to do a bit of triage. And I think taking holidays helps for everybody. So insisting, and it doesn't have to be big, long, fancy holidays. Just taking a couple of days of, and it's different things for different people. So for someone it could be exercise or sailing or golf or whatever, and for others it could be reading and music, or shopping. I don't know what it is for people.
I remember Harshbhai's golf, the first meeting that we had, and I was like amazed, how does he do it? At 4 p.m., 5 p.m. he just walks out.
No, and so because our own coping mechanisms are not a nice to have, it's a must have. If you don't do that, you won't be effective. So you shouldn't think about it as leisure. It's actually a requirement.
And the first question.
Okay, but then we can chat about that separately.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Question at the back? Okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, you go ahead, next one after that.
So, how long do you leave? So, I'm doing my second startup now. So, the question is, how long do you leave monetization? How far in the future? If you have good adoption, then how long do you leave monetization? Do you really want to think about monetization in the beginning?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you should know that you will be able to monetize.
So the question, that's because I knew that something like that, somebody will give a reply to that. But the deeper question is this: if you are doing something that is fundamentally going to alter the way people transact in things, or if the product value is such that it's not existing, so you cannot have anything comparable. For example, to give you an example of most fundamental things, like for example, take a Google or a Facebook, can't happen in 5 years. You cannot think of monetization the way, you don't know how to do monetize. You don't really know, because you're unlocking the value of that thing, but you know that it is fundamentally something important because people are adopting it, people are engaging with it. And so how long do you leave it? And do you start thinking about it in the beginning? Then I'll give you an example. So we are actually trying to alter the talent business this time. Okay, the way, and I hear a lot of talk about talent. So we identified a fundamental problem with the way talent is dealt with in the world, and we tried to find a solution. Now, when we built a solution, our approach was different, and we went in the market. And the first time that we were talking to businesses, to a business chamber, and they came out with a small supplementary thing that they wanted in the product. Now, if you were thinking about monetization from the beginning, we would not sit and suddenly now alter our prototype to fit this in, but it was a great suggestion. And today, that's what is driving our adoption. It's a very small tweak, very small little thing. We don't know, should we monetize it? Lots of people are telling us, why don't you start charging for it? And sometimes we feel that that's ridiculous. You can't charge for this. This is too small a thing. And it might, then if you start monetizing it, then will we actually go down the path that we were thinking we'll go down? Because this might be easy money then. This will just become like an app. That's not fundamentally going to change the talent industry at all. It's not going to change human resources. It's only going to be a tool. It's a small little tool that you just sell on the app stores. But there's this big danger in becoming that, right? So do you go after those big goals, and how long can you go after? 18 months, 36 months, how long should you go?
If you have a deep belief that this will fundamentally change how something is done,
Right.
and it will require a long lead time, then by all means continue down the non-monetization path till you have critical mass. And if it's a Google or a Facebook or whatever, you know you're
But they
building
didn't
it.
know that, right? When they were doing Google, they didn't really know that.
So, which is why it is not possible to actually respond to your question and say, when should you monetize? Because there is no right answer. I do hope that you have enough financial resources
Nobody
to
has enough
sustain.
financial resources.
So then you have
There's
to,
always round to round, right?
which is I think one of the questions you'll have to weave into this issue.
So the question is about that. But when people do invest into the business, then what is the answer that they are seeking, and what kind of people exist who.
So plenty of the
fund
entire
long-term
VC industry exists to do that. They, and so you need to find the right kind of investors who, first of all, understand your space and your technology, believe in it. It's also a good way for you to test your model because they see a lot of highly disruptive technologies. And then get the right investors who will have enough staying power along with you. But eventually, I think the world is moving, particularly in India, towards a show me the money.
Show me the money.
So where is the monetization? And when you come to Series B, Series C, it is very, very important to be able to show where will you actually get revenue and profitable revenue.
Where is one thing, but to actually start taking that money in. And
So I don't think you can answer your question as to when without knowing a whole lot more. And even then, I don't know if I can answer.
So what is the general standard for this?
There is no general standard. But look at Google, to your point.
I know.
So my answer to that is depending on the type of sector or the industry you
Yeah.
are in.
The
You have to see.
Human resources.
Sorry,
Human
Human
resource.
resources.
whatever it is, you are
And I
actually
come from
left.
media, so I would have answered that question very easily. What media
Yeah,
is.
but in FMCG, if you ask me what is our payback for a new business, I'm willing to wait for up to 10 years to break even and start making money, because in FMCG first few years is just investing in the brand, creating our advertising budget will be higher than the turnover, first
So,
few
but
years.
you'll also be, you start selling very quickly. You know,
Yeah, from
your
day
selling
one.
is not really postponed. In here, we are not trying to sell anything to anyone for a long time.
You
Why?
think just getting revenue.
Just
They're
getting
not getting
revenue.
revenue.
He doesn't want to get revenue.
It's not profit.
But
He
you're
doesn't
generating
want to-
trials. You're
But they're
generating
giving
trials.
away the product right now.
It's free. Yeah.
That I don't know about, but that maybe generating trials. I don't know what it does, but
Yeah,
I think it depends on the
it's
sector.
adoption. So this, unless a lot of people adopt it, you can't fundamentally change the market.
I think for a good business proposition, there is no lack of resources in my opinion. You'll always find
Like, you
resources.
find resources to fund.
It's not easy to find though.
Like you said, it's drying up, right? Because people don't want to take a long view anymore.
You'll
No, they
always
do want to take a
have
long
some,
view. They
but
just
if you
want to
do-
know that at some point there is monetization. And that monetization, there is enough of a market for not just for adoption, but for actually monetized adoption. So, will you have revenue? And then once it goes behind a paywall, since
Right.
you're from media, once it goes behind a paywall, will you sustain growth?
So, I
And
mean,
will it
media
be
is a
profit?
different question.
Yeah.
This is HR, this is a different thing altogether.
Really, businesses are not very different.
But
Ultimately.
a fund size, fund is in 5 to 7 years, right? Typically a fund is. If they are coming in and my revenues are going to start coming in 36 months, how does it work for them?
That's not a problem, by the way. So, remember the fourth pillar I spoke about, financing? So along with business strategy, you also think about your financing strategy, which is you may have a fund or two funds who are very early, maybe they're seed stage investors, they see you through your first 48 to 60 months, your first 5 years, at which point they need to exit. But if you're building a good business, you may not have profit, but you've created enterprise value, at which point they should be able to do a secondary sale.
Correct.
So you'll have a later, I'm not saying later stage private equity, but you'll have a Series A fund come in somewhere along the way. So between now and 60 months,
So
maybe at 36 months, you will have a Series A investor come
So
in.
36 to 48, before you start making any revenue at all, is actually not too out of the world.
I don't know. It depends on your business. So we'll have to get into a whole lot more detail, but you have to think about financing also, which is sequenced along and in phase with your business.
I mean, right now we're only doing safes, right?
Okay.
So we're only using safes.
I think we'll need to cut this because others are being. Sorry, I can't have a one-way conversation. Apologize. Maybe since you can have it on the side, talk to separate. Yeah. I think the lady at the back had a question, and then I'll take. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Chankana, and I run a contact center for the last 10 years. And we are sort of self-funded, as in our customers fund us through the cash. We manage through our own cash flows. So what I realized is that throughout my professional career, we were always looking at customer delight and customer first. I'm going back to the 4 pillars you spoke about, customer first and then people and all of that. But slowly I find myself leaning more towards people first and customer second, because I find that customer delight more often than not equates to exploitation of the partner or vendor. And it dents your cash flows, it dents, I mean, it depends your profitability, especially in low margin businesses like ours. So, is it somewhere, I mean, am I being fundamentally going wrong somewhere? Because I tend to go back.
Not at all. You're doing
Clients.
absolutely the right thing, because there can be badly behaved clients who then have to be
Yeah, especially
set
in
right.
the local, I mean, domestic
Sure.
market. We
Yes,
find
it's a
very
very tough
different when you deal with international markets and domestic, so we just get very aggressive with our clients.
Which you should.
Sometimes, okay.
Absolutely. You're in business.
Yeah.
You're giving them something that they should value.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you should arrive at a point of view and agreement on what that value is, and you should be quite aggressive about it. Nothing wrong with that.
Because then I find myself being more protective about
Of course.
my people and their balance and not ensuring they are not getting exploited. Because in our business, we don't have as much control over what our people are doing. The client has a greater
Yeah.
control. And therefore, we always have to intervene and say, stop here. And
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it helps to lay out, to sort of paint the landscape for your client. That if they push and squeeze too much,
yeah.
what will happen? The best people in your team may not want to work for them. They will have
Yeah,
poor
yeah.
quality. There will be
Yeah, so we
attrition,
move on
all
the
of
best
that. So you
people to
paint
the
the
next
landscape.
client.
These are the implications of your.
Right, all right, that's fine.
But you'll get books on customer first, you'll get book on people first.
First,
you know.
both.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Right, because when I thought, you know.
No, that
Yeah.
hierarchy is around what should come first.
yeah.
When it comes to a specific trade-off on things, but not on commercials, for God's sake. If you don't value your business, they won't value you.
Because when you said that, I thought, you know,
No, no, no.
probably
Not at all.
doing something wrong.
Not at
How
all.
much more time do we have?
We have another 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, please. I'll take next.
About, like one of the legs being important is the processes, having the systems in place. So is this about building SOPs and processes, and who drives it? The HR drives building the SOPs and getting the different HODs and departments to make SOPs, or the CEO drives it?
CEO has to drive it to start with.
Who documents it? And
The functions documented themselves. So your finance and accounts process should be owned by your CFO or director of finance or whatever you call that person. But your head of finance is responsible for finance processes, the documentation, the SOPs, etc. Same thing for HR, same thing for IT, and any other process you have. It could be a customer service process, could be a sales process. So whoever is the leader of that function is responsible. But you, as a CEO, as the founder, you have to champion it, because it will take time and extra effort to do. The first time you do it is always harder, so you'll have to champion it.
someone has to maintain the data or the library of the formats, the master formats. And so who's the right person to?
It depends, and it could be whoever. Maybe your CFO is the right person. Maybe your HR head is the right person. Someone who has adequate seniority on the team to have a bit more authority in doing that, and then maintaining the template and updating it and so on is
Admin.
an admin.
What's the question?
Hi,
Sorry.
my name is Samir, and we run a company which is building a lot of technology, but in product space. So we have an organization that has been over time built as a very non-hierarchical organization. We don't have too many power centers, and everyone who is growing at the top levels is encouraged to give up their direct responsibility. Now, in this kind of scenario, there is a team at the top which is able to gel with each other, expand that team, work as a committee, jointly almost bring together proposals and decisions, which I then only have to accept. But in that kind of scenario, in the long term, when I look as to who's going to be the CEO of this enterprise, I find it difficult to envision when things are working as committees, subcommittees, a lot of people going one level, two level, and they're growing people. And suddenly I have to tell one of them that, look, you guys are not equals. Now, how do I deal with this going forward?
Would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is you have distributed leadership
Yeah.
model, and which is good actually. If the leadership is capable, it's a very good model, I would think. So, and I think if you had to promote one of the guys, I reckon that he would continue participating or continue with that same distributed leadership model if he's convinced. So I don't see that he will change dramatically. I'm presuming that the distributed leadership model
Yes.
is working well. It's leading to empowerment, leading to
That's right.
retention of talent, leading to far more higher degree of diversity. So
Sure.
it's, I think on the face of it, looks very good. And I think if you promote one guy who is
Is there a
committed to
model-
this model.
Is there a model that says you don't promote anybody and
No. And on the
Can it
contrary,
continue?
you have to promote from within only. Because the moment you get somebody from outside, he will come from a different model.
What I'm saying is if you don't put somebody at the top, because internally designations don't matter. It's only when you put it out to the outside world that designation matters.
That I
So
think,
what is your
yeah.
driving factor right now? Is there a specific situation that requires you to promote
No,
somebody?
I'm just thinking that okay, it's going on. What will be the future when I have to give up as my position?
So he's the founder.
Just
Yeah.
talking of a hypothetical situation.
But aren't you the founder
Depends-
anyway then?
No,
It
but
depends
if
how
he
far
wants
it
to
is.
step down.
It depends how far out it is. If you
Yeah.
think it's going to happen in the next 2 years, then you plan for it. If it's going to happen at some point in the,
Then
it
you
will
let it-
happen,
let
but
it
it's in the next
unfold.
5, 7, 8 years. Yeah,
You
things
don't
change.
need to create some methodology now to
Not
see
right
where it
now.
will go.
No.
If it's working.
And you can have a different designation, you can have a different role for him as compared to a CEO, a
Yeah.
chief mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's terrific that it seems to be.
I
working.
think he's very good. He's
Right?
very unusual and it's really good.
Different people can have different roles as their main function. So I can say chief of technology, chief of business,
yes,
chief
yes.
Of course.
of human connect, and then they can work together.
Absolutely.
So it's not because conventionally people say you need one person at the top. Since I don't see how that can happen with our philosophy, then I don't know what to do about it.
But you are sort of the de facto person at the top.
Right now.
That's right.
So wherever there's a tiebreaker or a veto, who's that?
Yes, yeah.
It's you, right?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, I'm not needed because the
That's
philosophy is
wonderful.
working.
Yeah.
So they're able to bring consensus,
That's
knowing
wonderful.
what the philosophy
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
It's fantastic.
That's fantastic.
amazing.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Please.
So, my name is Kinjal and we are into manufacturing space. We do all kinds of shelving systems, steel fabrication, archiving, recording. The question was, from an SME point, we have our business plans, our strategy in place. Could you briefly touch upon, in a very macro way, what are the ways or what are our options for fundraising? I mean, we know private equity is one possible option that we can go through, but maybe a couple of other options.
Can you see we had a session on fundraising? It must be there on your portal.
Yes, it's on our YouTube.
I think that goes into great detail. It was like a huddle session for 2-3 hours. Again, she can answer, but within 2-3 minutes,
Yeah, yeah,
that will
I'll
give you
give you
far
a
more
broad brush
deeper.
Very broad brush, just a broad brush. Obviously, I'll try to pick that up.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the topic for this session,
Not
so
a
I
deep
think we
dive.
should not.
But you can
go
think
into
about
that, yeah.
venture. You can think about, depending on how big your business is, whether it's venture capital or it's growth equity. You can think about bank financing. You also now actually have a bunch of venture debt
Venture debt, yeah.
platforms.
Okay.
So there are many ways you can do it.
I'll definitely take that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if there are no
Okay.
questions, then we can.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I have to make a formal thank you as well.
God, all right.
Thank you so much, Anjali. This is our second engagement with Anjali. She was also part of the jury for the ASCENT awards, which are being given out at the upcoming conclave in November. So thank you so much for giving out that time. And of course, many thanks to Nikunj, who's been an ASCENT member for 5 years. Let me clarify that for you. You've been here for 5 years. Doesn't seem that long. And
No, I mean, enjoying it.
yeah, and I'm glad that more and more when we're looking at these huddles, we're looking at moderators from within the ecosystem because they understand this much better and
Yes.
can curate this and put this together much better.
The second
So-
time you are moderator from earlier, Rupak was there.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
yeah.
So I think that's something that we want to take forward
Good,
because not
good.
only are they moderating, but they're contributing as well to the conversation, and that's turning out to be a great, insights coming out for us. Thank you so much. I have a little token of appreciation for you.
Thank you.
Do enjoy the products. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I can't thank Harsh
I think so.
ever for so much contribution in terms of time and insights that keeps coming
Just
out
listed on, yeah.
for different sessions. So thank you so much.